Hello. Oh my gosh. OK, it's working. Good. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you very much for choosing me to listen to at this time on Monday. You made the wrong choice, but I will try my best anyway to be semi-interesting, I promise. As very kindly introduced, I'm here to talk about identity being the new external attack surface. I know that sounds a little bit strange. Bear with me. We will get to some sort of logic and sense around this. It will eventually kind of click, I hope. But yeah, of course, let's dive in. It works. All right, very quickly, just to introduce watchTowr. We are a attack surface management, continuous automated red teaming technology provider. We work with global banks, global insurers, governments to help them understand today how will the ransomware gangs, the North Koreans, APT groups gain access to your environment. That means understanding any TTP they might use to gain access to data, a system, or even identity. Obviously, we're a global business. Cyber, unfortunately, is a global problem, and we operate typically within industries that I would call pretty heavily targeted. You may have heard of watchTowr before, not because of only our tech, but because we are prolific in the media. We are the team to have analyzed every single end-day, zero-day in the last 18, 24 months at this point that's being used by real-world attackers. So think the plethora of VPN appliance zero days, all the way through to management solutions, MSSPs, firewalls, et cetera, Ultimately, it's our job to understand what TTPs, what techniques, what vulnerabilities attackers are using today, and thus we take our speed to analysis very, very importantly. Ultimately, our job is to keep our clients secure. Answer one very, very simple question. Today, how would someone breach you? Now, let's move into kind of understanding how identity plays into external attack surface. I think what we see on the screen right now is probably a familiar sight to everyone in the room. Or if not, this is the cyber kill chain. This is the process, the stages, the categories of TTP or tactics and techniques that we've seen attackers use for the last 10 plus years at this point, mapped along a process. Now, of course, life is never linear. This kill chain is never linear as well. But what I'm basically trying to kind of convey is that there's been a start, there's been a finish, and there have been multiple complex stages as part of typical cyber attacks historically. Someone sends you a phishing email. You open the attachment. They gain access to your machine. They might escalate privileges inside your network on your host. They might laterally move. Ultimately, they're working towards their objective. That objective might be stealing data from SharePoint. It might be ransomwaring your organization, etc. But effectively, a multi-step process that has become quite convoluted, quite complex, and ultimately gives, as defenders, a huge amount of opportunity to identify behavior at every single stage. That was built around the logic that networks and attackers look like this. So you had your nice, kind of solid shell. Not my best analogy. You had attackers trying to break through that shell to gain access to environments, move around environments, gain access to sensitive data. This is a fairly well understood topic, I suggest. Today is very different. Today, we still have those systems, we still have those environments. But actually, attackers don't even need to touch your network anymore to steal data, to steal IP, to steal money. If you think about the world today, you probably have quite a few SaaS platforms that you use in your environment. You probably outsource your IDP in some places, Azure AD as an easy example, Google Apps, Okta, etc. So from an attacker perspective, how they approach networks has really changed. Do they need to break through that firewall that you've got sat on your DMZ to gain access to an endpoint, to laterally move, to gain access to data? Or can they just log into M365? Now, what we see in the data is attackers have realized this, 100%. It's very, very clear at this point. Now, lots of charts, lots of bars, very exciting. The important two here, perhaps, is the amount that phishing has dropped. Phishing has materially changed in the last 12 months with regards to how much it's being used by attackers to gain access to organizations. Now, there's probably a few factors there. It's become harder. Mail gateways are now quite mature. URL filtering, URL reputations, all the way through to endpoint protection has become really robust. But what's also interesting is that attacks involving valid accounts as the first initial access mechanism have exploded. So I always kind of explain to people, attackers are fairly lazy. I'm a lazy guy. My team is lazy. Attackers built like us are exactly the same, extremely lazy. They are going to go for the easiest path into any organization so they can go home and have dinner. I promise you it's as simple as that. If attackers are showing us in the data that they're using valid accounts more to gain access to organizations, there's something to be read into that. What this basically means is that the entire kill chain has now been simplified, and I do appreciate quite simplified, into 2 stages. Buy an account, log in. Now, again, appreciate there's a slight oversimplification there. My point is to kind of explain that attack chains or kill chains have become significantly more simple. Everything that we relied on, thought that was me. Everything we relied on in the, it really is me. Everything we relied on in the past, I'm scared now, has materially changed in terms of opportunities to detect attackers. That kill chain historically allowed detection teams to basically look for indicators of activity at every single stage. Execution, C2, network comms, privilege escalation, lateral movement. Now, not so much. So we have to kind of accept that the new normal has completely changed. Right? It is no longer a massive kill chain that we can kind of rely on to see if we can catch attackers before they reach an objective. We have to really understand, OK, what's they going to do? I feel like I'm in trouble. All right. Regardless, though, we are seeing an explosion in what I call ways into an organization. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see a huge amount of vulnerabilities being discovered. Right? We know that there are massive amounts of vulnerabilities that have been high impact, critical this year with regards to typical network appliances. That's very, very obvious. But if we move past the traditional stuff, there is a change in the breaches we're seeing. These 3 stood out quite strongly. So you've got Snowflake, an attacker using credentials to gain access to databases. You've got Change Healthcare that got completely ransomware with the root cause of credentials. And Rockstar Games, if anyone plays or is aware of computers, GTA 6 was a fairly large leak last year, again, down to credentials. Let's look at what actually happened. I can't stretch this slide too much, to be very honest. It's fairly simple. Someone went on the internet. They bought a credential pair for Rockstar Games to log into Slack. They logged into Slack, and they downloaded all the videos. Fairly painful. I mean, that had a material impact on their stock price. Years of kind of game dev expectation completely leaked, all down to a single username and password pair. If anyone remembers the drama about 6 months ago, when everyone started announcing that Snowflake had had a breach, we were seeing Ticketmaster, all the way through the governments, through the large enterprises, through the banks, having all their data exposed, exfiltrated from Snowflake. At the time, I seem to recall most people declared Snowflake compromised or vulnerable. But no, it was fairly simple. Someone was going on the internet, buying credentials for Snowflake, logging in, exporting the data. It has materially changed. Now, the question we always get is, where do these creds come from? Now, the easy answer is to say they come from data breaches, and data breaches are very scary. And if people just kept their data more secure, this stuff wouldn't be possible. But we know it's not realistic. Right? Materially, we know that's not going to change anything. Nothing's actually going to happen. But these are still a massive source of credentials. If you reuse your passwords from your personal account through to your corporate account or across corporate resources, or God forbid, you get phished for SSO, you will end up here. But where we're seeing a bigger lean, I think, in terms of where these creds come from, has been the massive explosion and proliferation of effectively password stealer Trojans or info stealers, depending on which vendor you talk to. Now, these are some pictures of logos for these password stealers. They have proper brands. They have everything. It's quite cool, actually. I mean, someone put material effort into designing these logos and definitely didn't do it in paint. But what you can begin to understand is that all this data, this influx of data, is now coming from very specifically placed Trojans on endpoints. Whether these be personal endpoints or enterprise endpoints, it's actually a complete mix. On the watchTowr side, we regularly see BYOD devices hit with a password stealer Trojan, so it's someone's personal machine they have at home, but then logging into ADFS, VPNs, etc. That all trickles down into what I nicely call credential marketplaces, Telegram. So you as an operator can go and take Redline and deploy it as far and wide as you want and start using that to kind of harvest credentials from machines you breach. Or you can make your life a lot easier, like I said, be lazy, and go on a credential marketplace, get $4 worth of Bitcoin, and just buy exactly what you want. I want a credential pair for Acme Company to log into acme.com, and I'm willing to pay $4, and you'll get a selection. On the flip side, it's even easier than that in other cases. We regularly see, as marketing initiatives, the makers of all of these info-stealer malware effectively use Telegram as their way to advertise. They will give out free logs. So every single day, they will dump text files of username and password combinations that they know work onto a Telegram channel for anyone to gain to show that they have capability. If you want more, you can buy them. But as you can imagine, when you give something away for free, everyone's using it. Oh, wrong button, sorry. Now, as a completely non-biased vendor, I believe that attack surface management should be solving this or helping with this at the very least. It's a very, very clear space that we should be playing in. Historically, and I love this picture, historically, this has fallen into the threat intel company's kind of remit. Oh my God, today, your company came up 3,000 times in a Ticketmaster breach. You should reset everything. Do it now. And that will happen on Monday, and Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday. So by that time, you've probably gone through 5 passwords that week, and nothing's really changed. The reality is that actually validation is really important. Of those 3,000 credentials, which actually work into my organization, where do they gain access to, what data do they gain access to? And that's where ASM really should be helping. Now, to give some context here, I'm not going to kind of bore everyone to death. Visibility is very important. We know this. We have to understand how attackers are going to use these credentials to gain access to an organization for it to be materially useful. Because then we can begin to map out, OK, if we've got access to red line password logs, where do those credentials work? Where can we gain access? Ignore the text. It's not important. The important part is the image on the right-hand side. What I'm trying to impress upon everyone is that this is one of many tactics attackers have today to gain access to an organization. My point being that they are going to keep evolving. Next year, I'm sure that image will look different. That's just the reality, right? But ultimately, credential stuffing is what's on trend, for lack of a better phrase. Now, there was a massive kind of law enforcement operation last week where they pulled down infrastructure for a lot of these gangs. But the reality is this will continue. For us, it's not about notification. It's about being able to very quickly tell you, Redline released these credential logs 3 minutes ago. These 7 creds work on that system. So with our automation at watchTowr, we have the entire process mapped out. We can very quickly capture credentials that have been exposed on the dark web via info-stealer Trojans, in data breaches, etc. Map that to your organization and test if they actually work. So instead of emailing you and saying, oh my God, 3,000 exposed credentials, your week is over, we can actually tell you, actually, you're fine. These don't really matter. These creds haven't worked for years. It's not important. Now, I'm sure someone in the audience is thinking, but Ben, we have 2FA. So this is completely irrelevant. My life is fine. I don't need to worry at all because I've got MFA in place. I use a secondary device, whether it be a mobile phone, an RSA token, yada, yada, yada. Wrong button again. Unfortunately, you would be wrong. This is what's happening right now. So in the last month or so, there's been a lot of conversation around if people have effectively enforced MFA, if we're now seeing password stealer Trojans have a material level of access to a host, then actually we can do more. What I've tried to very crudely map out in this flow chart is realistically what happens at different stages of the authentication process. So user logs in, they enter valid credentials. The password stealer Trojan goes, great, I've just got John's creds for Exchange at Acme Company. And that's historically where, there's no laser pointer, that's historically where I guess you would get those password stealer Trojan logs from. Now what everyone forgot was that those password stealer Trojans are executing code on the endpoint. They have complete control. So they've taken it a step further. Instead of just taking out valid credentials when they see a partially authenticated cookie come in, they go to the next stage. OK, when the user enters a valid 2FA response, the application, the system, the target system, will upgrade their session to a fully authorized session cookie. So that cookie is now credential validated and 2FA validated. This is where we sit. We can extract all of those cookies from extracted and exposed information, bypassing the entire login process. So those cookies that get authenticated after the MFA is successfully passed can ultimately then allow anyone to bypass your controls in place. This is really important. This is a material change happening right now, and we are seeing attackers use this today. I mean, literally today. This is where we're going to see continued pain. So the reaction to password sealer Trojans has been MFA, conditional logins, checking that the browser fingerprint matches, etc. Unfortunately, with authenticated session cookies, that problem will persist. On the left-hand side, you can kind of see what these password sealer Trojans provide the purchaser, for lack of a better phrase. Not just your passwords, but all the cookies, all the autofills, anything you've got in a browser that will allow you to kind of fill out your life kind of easier, your credit cards. It's all there for any user to take. Anyway, hopefully that was relatively interesting. If not, I'm sorry. You can blame Melvina. But thank you very much for everyone's time. I do appreciate it. And it can only go up from here. So yeah, thank you very much.